Hi, Scott.
Hi, Greg. How are you?
Good, thank you. And you?
I am good.
Fantastic.
Congratulations, by the way, on your new headquarters. I saw the building there. That looked like amazing.
Yeah. Finally,
I
finally,
imagine.
it happened. It's like it's our probably fourth office, and probably we'll have enough space to grow here for another 5 years. So we are in Krakow. The weather is absolutely fantastic. Where are you currently?
I'm in Boston. The weather is not so fantastic today.
All right. All right. Good stuff. Thanks very much for accepting the invitation to our meeting, which we held hold like regularly every half a year. Basically, we're trying to invite our community and introduce to them like really exciting people from the industry. So we work in e-commerce, Martech, primarily in Europe as Seismonago. And of course, apart from basically just working with the software and then creating the software, we try to really inspire the industry and inspire the marketers around Europe. I'm absolutely excited about the fact that you decided to join and accepted our invitation. Because honestly, I have been, watching your Martech landscape. Even before I actually decided to be an entrepreneur, and I really, somehow your activity really inspired me to. I was a marketer all my life, but the way you were presenting this Martech world, that really gave me a clear sign that let's do something serious there, right? And Seismonago, like really your map, your commentary on that, was accompanying me, and I was sharing that across really hundreds of other meetings with the industry. So I'm glad you are here, and I'll basically I wanted to have just let you go with your presentation to our guest today. Super
Awesome. Well,
happy
thank you
you're
so
here.
much for having me. I'm really excited to do this with you.
Thank you very much.
Am I ready to roll?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to chat with you about a Martech supercollision, the smashing together of AI, cloud data warehouses, composability and no code, and more. It's a really exciting time here in the industry, right? This quote from Bill Gates that things like ChatGPT, that the AI revolution, every bit as important as the PC, as the internet. Entirely possible it might be more so. And then, of course, we have crazy headlines like this one here in the US. Apparently, a woman created an AI bot, married it, and started a virtual family and calls him the perfect husband. And I thought AI was just going to be coming for my job. So anyways, lots of interesting things happening. My name's Scott Bricker. I write a blog, Chief Martech, chiefmartech.com. I also work at HubSpot for their product ecosystem, and I've written a book called Hacking Marketing. What you might know me for more likely is some version of the marketing technology landscape. I've been publishing here over the past 12 years. And boy, over that time period, it has just grown remarkably. The first one I did in 2011 had around 150 products. The one we released here back in the spring of this year had grown to over 11,000. I mean, we all know that marketing has gone through tremendous changes over this past decade, but it's sometimes hard to quantify just how much marketing has changed. Like, could you put a number on it? And I would humbly propose that the growth we have seen in the MarTech landscape is one concrete artifact of just how much change marketing has undergone. So if I was going to put a number on it, I'd say marketing has changed by 7,258%. And it's not just marketing. I'm sure you've seen other versions of these software landscapes, popping up everywhere. Channel ecosystem management. If you're in sales, Nancy Nardin had the sales tech landscape. HR has its own landscape of, dozens and dozens of different products. The legal industry, or even for your internal in-house attorneys, right? Tremendous amount of software. Restaurants, I thought it was just about, cooking it up and bringing it to the table, but restaurants have become an incredibly high-tech ecosystem. Hotels have a tremendous number of SaaS technologies. I mean, even cannabis, has like a whole tech ecosystem that has grown up around it. And if you're thinking, boy, the people in procurement must really not like, all these other departments having all this software that they buy. Well, procurement isn't actually in a better situation either. They've now got dozens, hundreds of products in their ecosystem as well. There are so many software products out there in the world at this point that there is now a software product to help you create landscapes of the logos of other software products, which, okay, is a bit meta. This is a really phenomenal shift that has happened in software and how we integrate it into business. The analysts at IDC have estimated that by the end of this year, there will be more than 500 million digital apps and services out in the cloud. Now, to be fair, the vast majority of those are going to be custom developed apps, things like people's own websites or their, mobile apps, internal applications that they build. But still, a non-trivial number of them are also these packaged apps. And it's not just about the number of apps that are being created. It's that adoption of large stacks of SaaS subscriptions has continued to grow. This is some data presented in an interesting way, some data from a SaaS management tool called Productive, where they actually track the number of SaaS applications that businesses subscribe to, and from 2021 to 2023, on the left, small businesses on average went from 242 apps in their stack to 253. Mid-market companies from 238 to 235. All right, that was a little bit 335, right? And then in the enterprise, from 317 SaaS apps on average to over 470. And actually, ironically, marketing is not the department with the most SaaS applications. Engineering, operations, IT, and security. These all are departments that tend to have, frankly, a lot more subscriptions themselves. It's fascinating, even like a little bit more of the data that got broken down here by Productive is you start to see from 2022 to 2023, a little bit of a pullback. Obviously with in the pandemic time and the rush to do all things digital, there was a very large surge, in SaaS adoption. This past year, we've now started to see a little bit of rationalization, reining that in, but still, these are very large stacks. And so part of what we will need to be thinking about here, and we'll talk a bit about this today, is how companies manage, this diverse environment where, it's not just like a static number of apps in your stack. Some other data from another SaaS management company, Xylo, showed that for, companies with 500 to 2,500 employees, on average, they have a new SaaS app that's coming online, 5 of them like every month. Pretty wild, pretty wild. So with all this software, like what matters? Well, one of the things my friends at Martech.org, have tracked the choices people make when they replace one SaaS application with another, and what are the reasons, like what are the things people look for when they replace one SaaS app with another? Well, one thing is they're looking for a better experience, either for themselves or their customers. Certainly they're looking, at cost. Is there a way to, reduce expenses? But then the next top two reasons are they're looking for better integrations or open APIs. They're looking for data centralization and data capabilities. It's basically this recognition that in a heterogeneous environment of all these different software tools, the ability for them to integrate together and for us to be able to pull data together has enormous value. And this is more important than ever because this past year, with everything that's been happening around AI, is we recognize we are on the cusp of probably pretty significant changes. Things are not going to be slowing down anytime soon. A recent report from IBM, where they interviewed CEOs about what factors they thought were going to have the greatest impact on their businesses over the next 3 years. Technology factors, which covers a wide range of things, technology factors is by far the number one. We know we are in this incredible period of change. And as part of an incredible period of change, we often see, the pattern of the Gartner hype cycle. I suspect you're familiar with this, right? Where new technology arrives, very quickly, the expectations of it get inflated far beyond what it can do. Then people realize that, we fall into the trough of disillusionment. And then slowly we figure out okay, actually, what's the real use, the real capabilities here as we go up the slope of enlightenment to the plateau of productivity? It's funny, we see so many hype curves that I almost see now very often there's an anti-hype curve, in reaction to this, of people like, some new technology. So what? That's total crap. See, I told you so, and tried it before, it didn't work. But the truth is, we do see these technologies evolve and become useful. And the rate at which that's happening is, frankly, accelerating. And so one of the things I often recommend is that, as marketing leaders, as marketing operations or marketing tech leaders, you want to sort of manage your company's journey through the hype cycle. I call this like the Goldilocks zone on the cycle. It's like you don't want to get too carried away with the hype, but at the same time, you don't want to be too dismissive of the possibilities, because this is technology that changes what our businesses can do and what our competitive advantage is. So over the next 20 minutes or so here, I want to talk to you about these three forces that I see, colliding together in the Martech space. Of course, there's AI, but I also want to talk a bit about data and a bit about composability and how these things feed into each other. So let's start with data. Because even when we eventually close out here with AI, one of the things that you're probably hearing a lot of, and I believe it's true, is ultimately AI is all about the data and the data you're feeding into this. So it helps to maybe step back and look at the way we used to manage data in marketing. We have all these different MarTech apps, and generally each one had its own database. And then we do a certain amount of integration between these apps, sending, some data from one app to another, throwing it over the wall. And this wasn't just marketing, of course, right? We saw the same thing elsewhere in the org and sales and customer, service. And if you thought it was sometimes hard to integrate things within the marketing stack, it was even harder typically to integrate things between marketing and sales, or sales and customer service. Now, over time, we got more and more of the data from these apps. We would push it into our data warehouses, or more recently, our cloud data warehouses, through something called ETL, extract, transform, load, or extract, load, transform, depending on a little detail there. But within those warehouses, we wouldn't do a lot with it. We maybe use some business intelligence or data analytics tools. But to be honest, the majority of the data that landed in that warehouse never got used at all. Now in marketing, there was a rise over the past 5 years or so of these customer data platforms, which have been one attempt to try and help facilitate consolidating data within marketing. But in these past couple years, there's actually been a more radical shift that has started to happen, which is all this data that was flowing down into the cloud data warehouse. We're now also starting to see, if it was ETL to get data into the warehouse, a unfortunately named class of tools called reverse ETL. what does reverse ETL do? Pushes it in the other direction, has made data sharing between apps and cloud data warehouses more bidirectional. And this is starting, this is still very early, but this is starting to become almost like a universal data layer. In fact, in some cases, we're even seeing apps that they store their data, they work directly within the cloud data warehouse. And this is exciting because, this is also accelerating the speed at which analytics and machine learning, other kinds of AI, can turn this into more of a feedback loop. That it's not just a one-way push of data, it's, this cycle of data, which also makes it easier for us to share data across departments. That's very exciting for marketing because this opens us up to new data and insights that we can leverage for customer engagements that were harder to get before. Even the world of CDPs has been sort of changing to often what they call a composable CDP model, where, they can also read data directly from within the cloud data warehouse too. Now, I know that's a bit of a complicated diagram. So here's the simple little version is we're going from the old world where marketing operations used to generate all this data and then just funnel it down into the data warehouse to something that is more of a flywheel, where yes, marketing operations generates data, sends it to the data warehouse, but other things throughout our business are feeding into the data warehouse, and we're now pulling from that to affect what we do with our marketing operations. And this has some really exciting advantages as we start to adopt this because, it's giving us a greater range of first-party data from across the company. In some ways, it's making data more portable, getting rid of some of the lock-in, that we've had with certain apps. And it also lets marketers leverage the data ops investment that often is happening elsewhere in IT or in data teams across the company. And you see this shift happening with, apps that are being listed in Snowflake's marketplace, which is one of those cloud data warehouses out there. But really, what's happening here is an aggregation of data, which is a little bit different than consolidation. We've been talking about consolidation in Martech for ages, reducing a large number of apps down into just a few or one. And at least based on the data we see from the landscape and, tech stacks, we've not been extremely successful at the consolidation strategy. Not to say it doesn't happen, but it clearly is not consolidating down into a very small number. Aggregation is a little bit different. It's almost recognizing that there's going to be a large set of things, but can we provide tools and mechanisms that make it easier for us to leverage that diversity? And there are examples of this out on the, on the larger stage, right? Like social media platforms, aggregate millions of social media creators. Smartphones, have aggregated millions of mobile apps. Data warehouses, which we were just talking about, like Snowflakes and Databricks and Amazon, they're aggregating potentially dozens or hundreds of data sources across your business. CRM, CDP platforms, right? They're helping to aggregate, dozens or hundreds of customer touch points into one environment where we can work with it. And in many ways, what we start to see is some consolidation among those aggregation platforms, partly because of the value they provide by aggregating, their particular domain. And aggregation can happen at different layers, right? It can happen at the data layer, which is what we see with data warehouses. It can happen at the workflow or orchestration layer for aggregating process. It can happen at the UI layer for how we aggregate experience for, customers or employees. There's even governance layers for aggregation to help aggregate control. And I threw into this deck just a bunch of different examples at each one of these layers. We talked about the data layer, at the workflow layer, you sometimes see things like iPaaS or workflow automation tools. At the UI level, even things like shared collaboration tools like Teams, Slack, and Google Workspace. At the governance layers, tools around privacy and data governance, identity management. And so the thing I like about aggregation is, we're coming from a world where we thought of tech stacks as being very fragile, that they would break when new apps or data were added. This is challenging because we keep bringing new apps and new data, to our stack, to something that these aggregation platforms facilitate, which is making them more anti-fragile. that they actually gain value from new apps and data. So that's sort of what's happening at the data layer, and it sort of leads into this concept of composability. And to talk about composability, I need to get a little bit nerdy for a moment, big surprise, and tell you about something called Conway's Law. So Conway's Law is a concept in software that simply says, like, okay, when you have a set of teams who build a software product, the software product tends to reflect those teams. It reflects the way they communicate with each other. I would actually go further and say it's not just about the way those teams communicate with each other, but it's a little bit about their beliefs, their culture, their philosophy. All of that kind of gets embedded in the software app. Now, what's interesting when you think about that is when a buyer, adopts one of these software apps, there's almost an inverse Conway's Law, that if the software app, captures, the way the software vendor actually operates, in many ways, the software buyer needs to adapt their company to work the way the software does, which is not inherently a bad thing, right? We're all going through a lot of change and evolution and transformation. And so actually, it can actually be quite beneficial, to like change your company to adapt the way a software recommends. But as we continue to go down this path of getting more and more sophisticated as to how we build our digital businesses, sometimes we start to chafe, at the constraints of that inverse Conway's Law. And what you're seeing more and more is, the configurability and the openness, of more and more software platforms, let companies not just consume an app or configure it, but even get better and better at being able to customize it or compose across multiple apps, maybe even create their own, And so this is when you hear people talking about composability, in software, that's essentially the mission. We sometimes use the analogy of like Lego blocks, just like you put together different interlocking Lego blocks, you can compose software apps or workflows or experiences that way. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, I don't know. I mean, Lego blocks, these are like kids' toys. Can you actually even build anything meaningful with Lego blocks? And actually, it turns out you can. Somebody built a ship, a model of a ship out of like 2 million Lego blocks. So hopefully your software isn't going to be that complex. But the truth is, when we start talking about composability, we already see it, through a lot of our businesses, composable, websites, or if you're a programmer, you might be using code libraries, or if you're using some of those no-code automation tools like, Zapier, even in some ways like spreadsheets, like Excel and Google Worksheets, let you compose things once you start using a little bit of the script language. So we're already starting to use composability. But I think what we're looking at in the years ahead here is being able to do even more. And we have all these different apps and data sources and maybe third-party APIs. And increasingly, what we want to be able to do is for any given app or experience or workflow is be able to pull pieces from this together to create the exact experience we want. And it's almost going from a world where we used to like buy packaged software and it sort of came as is. Or I guess your other choice was you could build something entirely from scratch, to almost a hybrid of these two worlds, where you get a packaged app, that out of the box actually, works a particular way. It's very opinionated, but you have the flexibility to adapt and change it as you need. And the reason this is so powerful is because as our businesses become more and more digital, we have more and more things that we want to improve. Like automation is one example. And I love this. Well, I don't love this, but I found this stat really interesting about a year and a half ago from, the Information Week folks that they were asking IT teams, like, how long is the average backlog when the business requests a particular automation? And in 70% of the cases, 75% of the cases, it's 3 or more months. That's a long time to wait for even a simple automation. And so this is part of what drove what has been called the no-code movement over the years is, hey, could we empower business users, or at least business operations teams, to be able to self-serve at least more of their simple apps and automations, and so there's been whole landscapes, a variety of different, no-code tools to support that. But it's exciting, right? Because in some ways, this is a democratization of technology. Technology tends to start out, it can only be really leveraged by experts in that technology. Then over time, it starts to become accessible by experts in other domains who are going to use it. And then eventually power users, regular users. This is sort of what we've seen in the shift from code to low code to no code. And in marketing, this is kind of where marketing technologists have really thrived over the past decade. As they sort of sit at that, intersection of, they're domain experts in marketing, but they're still quite technical. Some of them might even be, considered power users, in marketing. And I believe, Gartner has referred to this as like the citizen developer movement. And we see this happening across the business, right? For years, we used to talk about big data, right? Like all these different data things and the complexity and scale and how do we collect it and store it and analyze it. But now with all of these like no-code tools evolving and more power users and business operations teams being able to self-service needs, I think we've shifted into a world that I would call big ops, where it's not just the data, but it's the scale and complexity of the apps and agents and automations that are interacting with that data. I mean, a metaphor I sometimes use for this is if, big data was like this far away data lake that you needed to be you needed a professional Sherpa to climb up to and peer into its depths for wisdom. The world of big ops, well, it's still this huge body of water, but it's much more of an interactive water park where everyone is splashing around together in it, which has its all set of challenges, as we think about, right? It's not just marketing ops, it's sales ops, revenue ops, DevOps, data ops, web ops, ML ops, IT ops, finance ops. Whew, it's a lot of ops. All right. So, but this is now going to bring us into, well, I'm sure the topic you are all anticipating, which is how this is intersecting with AI. AI, are you sick of hearing about it yet, or just getting started? Tom Fishburne, who is a cartoonist in the marketing space, had this great cartoon about a month ago. It's like, hey, AI turns this single bullet point into a long email that I can pretend I wrote. And then on the other side, hey, AI makes a single bullet point out of this long email that I can pretend I read. Not far from the truth. Boy, there's just been an explosion of software here around AI. Certainly a lot of like products, built on top of AI. And this list on the left barely scratches the surface. And of course, you're seeing like pretty much every product start to incorporate more and more AI features into how it works. But then there's a whole infrastructure underneath the AI industry that is exploding as well too. For marketers, it's a question of like, okay, well, what do we do with this? And the most recent CMO survey that came out a few weeks ago, says like, well, we're using this for more content personalization, more content creation. It's starting to be used for some programmatic ad and media buying, predictive analytics. Frankly, we've been using AI for predictive analytics for a while, but we're using it more. So this gives you a bit of the sense of use cases. I suspect a number of you are, testing some of these ideas yourself already. I have to admit, I was surprised. The very last thing here at the end was biometrics or chipping. Chipping being where we actually implant chips in people. And having 1.6% of CMOs say like, we're using biometrics or chipping. I'm like, that actually seems like a lot of people for that, but I don't know. The science fiction world, it's growing around us. So what are some of the things though that we're doing with AI? I mean, certainly you've heard about it on the content creation side and the targeting side, and so I'm not going to talk more about that. But I did want to share a few other approaches and use cases that I think are really interesting. One is that it's starting to shift the user interface we have for working with software. And one example of this is Microsoft Power Apps. They've added copilots, and Microsoft Power Apps is one of those sort of low code, no code platforms, and like now, this one example they had for creating a database, like you don't have to like actually do any of like the mechanics of the data. You just say like, hey, I want to add a column here, give me some recommendations for other columns for this table. It really becomes a co-pilot. In fact, at some point, I'm wondering like how much is a co-pilot and how much is its pilot, but this is changing the interface. I mean, if you can describe what you want, in natural language, increasingly we're seeing software apps be able to execute your wish. And to me, this is such a transformative moment we are headed towards, because if we go back to this graph where we looked at like these citizen developers, you pretty much had to be a domain expert or a power user to really take advantage of those self-service tools. But I think what we're seeing with generative AI is increasingly a lot of these like self-service capabilities are going to become accessible to general business users, general marketers. Ethan Mollick, who is a professor at the Wharton School of Business, recently published a paper with a number of other folks where they did this very large study with the consultants at BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, something like 740 consultants. And they gave them all the same set of missions to do, these very like, typical consulting, management consulting tasks. And then they had half of them that, they gave the AI tools to use, and the other half just used, the way they've always done that work. And the difference was remarkable. Those who were leveraging AI tools, they got more tasks done, they got them done faster, and the quality of the things they produced was actually higher as well, too. And so this is the sort of stuff, I mean, there's a lot of figures going around about the impact AI will have on the economy. This is one stat from McKinsey, estimating that, there may be up to a 4.4 trillion increase, in annual global productivity, a huge portion of that actually in marketing and sales and customer operations. But we're early in this, Now, one of the things, if you're familiar with Clay Christensen, who has this model of disruptive innovation, the way he would talk about disruptive innovation is very often you have a market and industry where there's an incumbent, there's an existing way of doing things that tends to be fairly advanced and fairly sophisticated, and a disruptive innovation, it comes from below. It initially is able to do things that are very simple in comparison, and so like a classic example would be like, in the no-code world, no-code tools don't really replace software developers. I mean, if you want to do like a real software app, you probably need professional software engineers. But where they can be helpful is in these small little mini apps or like workflows or things like this that, quite frankly, it isn't worth the time and expense, of a professional software developer to do it. But if you could empower, ops people and business users at a low end to do this themselves, it actually allows them to get a lot more done, and in the model of disruptive innovation, they actually call this the underserved area. These are things that we probably wanted to do, but it didn't make economic sense to do them if we needed a high-end solution to make it so. And this is what we're seeing with bringing these AI natural language interfaces to more of these tools for analytics or like automation, is it's actually helping us self-serve more of these low-end use cases that just weren't able to be addressed before. Now, the other trick about, disruptive innovation is it keeps improving. And so over time, it eventually starts to come into those mid-range and high-end use cases. But what we typically see is when that happens, then it's the experts themselves who actually start to adopt and use these tools to amplify their talents and capabilities too. I mean, we could spend hours talking about all the, effects this is likely to have. But one of the things I get very excited about is even when we think about automation in our businesses, typically when we've thought of automation, it's been a very task-oriented thing. Like I want to automate this particular task, which has some impact on productivity. But as we start to have everything connected across our business through APIs, we're able to start looking at automation that crosses processes, that crosses multiple teams, perhaps multiple departments. And this becomes not just about productivity, it starts to become about how we orchestrate process across our business. And then at an even higher level than that, when we make it easier and easier for people to create these things and to iterate on them, to change them, to evolve them, then this becomes a process that actually allows us to accelerate innovation. The ability to experiment and advance how we do things, we lower the cost and time required to do that. And this is, again, this kind of gets back to that McKinsey stat of why we could expect, frankly, trillions of dollars, in productivity improvements here in the years ahead. There's one other thing on the AI side I just wanted to plant the seed with you is, I think from a marketing perspective, we also want to be paying attention to AI as a new channel by which we reach and engage our audiences. And a great example of this is ChatGPT plugins. Things like, for like, hey, ChatGPT won't just answer your questions, but with these plugins, it can do things like, find, flights and hotels for you. It can make restaurant reservations. It can do shopping for the groceries, putting things in your cart. This is starting to take on more and more of an agent service. And what's interesting is you think about these companies who created plugins for ChatGPT, right? This becomes a channel for them to engage with customers. ChatGPT was the first to do it. Now Google Bard is also starting to support plugins. We start to think about like, how these generative AI search interfaces are going to change the practice of search engine optimization. Microsoft Bing has also made it clear they're headed in this direction as well too. And so just something to be thinking about here, keeping an eye on as a marketer of these AI agents, how we will start to work with them to become a new channel to our customers. Now, there's so much more that's happening here in the world of AI. We've been talking a little bit about these like first order effects of like, hey, it's easier to create content. What's going to happen? You get more content. Oh, it's easier to create software. What are you going to likely get? More software. AI can help like make sense of all this content and data and answer questions for us. Great. Well, that's going to change traditional search engines. It's going to make the long tail of content and data more accessible. I mean, all these first order effects are really exciting and interesting. But the truth is, they will in themselves be a trigger for a new set of second order effects. That as marketers, we kind of want to peer around the corner and see what's coming ahead. As we get more and more content created out there, trusted sources are going to become even more valuable. Buyers might actually have their own agents, to pull content, that's relevant to them. How do we serve those agents? More and more software is going to be great in a lot of ways. But boy, actually, keeping track of all these new software and workflows is going to be a new challenge, for IT departments. It's great that, data is now becoming more accessible to more people, but this is going to make us think about like, how does data become a marketing channel? How do we think about, creating moats with proprietary data sets? And then, certainly going on into AI executing more tasks for us autonomously. I would say this comes back to, that model I was showing you about the shift from big data to big ops. I think the scale of what we're going to see with big ops is only going to get bigger. So what's exciting is any one of these forces would be an enormous change and impact on marketing on its own. But you take all three of these together and the way they feed off of each other. Well, this is why I call it a supercollision. Martech's law, we've said over the years, is about this wrestling between the exponential growth in technological change, but the less than exponential growth in how we as people change and organizations change. This is challenging. I know everybody feels this pressure. But what we're going to see here with all these, capabilities around data and composability and AI is almost a reset that I think is going to change the level of capability across many, many businesses. And this is a great opportunity for us. One other stat from McKinsey I had found I thought was really interesting is, as they've been talking to companies that have been adopting AI or those thinking about adopting AI, those who have actually adopted and are really, the high performers, they've really focused now actually on reskilling and retraining up their employees, to take advantage of these tools. Versus those who haven't gone very far with it, they're like, I don't know, do we need new employees? Will we need employees at all? This data seems to suggest that like investing in your employees to really let them harness these technologies, has the greatest opportunity. And there's a lot to do to invest in folks. Ethan Malik, who I'd cited that paper earlier, he had a quote recently that he was given much better documentation for the generic garden hose he bought on Amazon, than for this immensely powerful AI tools that, have been released by the world's largest companies. It's true. There's not a lot of great documentation out there. And so one of the things I will leave you with, this is my last slide, is the conference board interviewed a wide variety of marketers at different levels, and they were asking them, how are you learning about how to use AI? Most people, they learn by like reading articles, watching videos, exploring it on their own time, maybe talking with colleagues. But here near the very bottom, when it comes to like getting training and guidance from their company, boy, for the most part, I mean, like mid-level junior marketing folks say only 3% of them are getting that. There's such an opportunity for us as marketing leaders to invest in marketing enablement to help teach our teams how to leverage these technologies and unlock that, our piece of that 4.4 trillion in productivity gains. So super, super exciting time to be in marketing and Martech. Thank you for having me. And Greg, I don't know, do we have time for any questions? Happy to take a few questions if we have some.
Think there is no question at the moment, but everybody who wants to ask question, feel free to do that. Otherwise, you can always send a question and we will answer them after the conference.
Yes, and I know the recording will be shared. Can also share the slides since I presented a lot of data. So yeah, if you want to take advantage of any of that, happy to share that as well.
We have a question. What is the most often question you ask to ChatGPT?
Okay, I will answer that. Although it turns out, at least for me, it's not a marketing question. Typically, is my daughter is in high school and she's taking an Algebra 2 class, and every night, like, I have to help her with algebra. But to be honest, it's been a number of years since I've taken algebra myself. So I find myself going to ChatGPT and can you explain to me this algebra concept? How would I approach doing this problem? And I have to say, it is miraculous in how well of a job it does for that.
Great. Super interesting. I was recently in, of course, thank you very much, Scott. Great presentation, super inspiring. I was recently in the Tatra Mountains, and I met. It was like middle of nowhere, and on this track at 2,000 meters, and there was another kind of lone wolf walking. He said, "Hi, be careful down there. There's a bear walking." And I said, "Jesus Christ, what I should do basically right now? And shall I escape or something?" I decided I asked ChatGPT, "What shall I do?" When you meet a bear on the track in the mountains, and I just felt so much comfortable about it. I went further down.
Boy, that's one case where you hope ChatGPT is not hallucinating.
Exactly. Interesting. So there are some other questions from Osvaldo Spadano. How do you think AI will change human behavior?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a little bit hard to predict because of the fact that this is still so new. I mean, a year ago, right, it was like in November of last year, that ChatGPT arrived, and all of a sudden, like, wow, this AI stuff can actually get really useful. My sense is, particularly in marketing, let me phrase it this way. Most marketers I know are incredibly busy. the amount of things they have to do, the amount of things that they're like juggling, days tend to be like very full. And one of the challenges with that is often a lot of the things that are keeping them busy during the day are not the creative, strategic, experimental like ideas. A lot of it's just like this busy work of stuff that needs to get done, you know? And so my sense is, at least on this next horizon, I think we're going to see AI start to help us take some of the busy work out and hopefully give us a little bit more room, a little bit more freedom to do what we came to marketing to do, you know, which is to like come up with new ideas and experiment with things and try them out and create, and to be able to do that at a scale and a speed and an economy that frankly is, you know, like that, like nothing we've had before.
Yeah. I have one question. I just can't resist that. I'm a big fan of this Martech law, and this, of course, this kind of organizational change is never following the technological change. And what sort of best examples of crossing that chasm basically, and getting to the pace of technological change in organizations have you observed? I mean, what kind of, have you seen some operationally people addressing that challenge?
Well, okay, so I've never seen anyone get to the place where we change as fast as technology changes. So if there's a silver bullet out there to do that, yeah, I have not yet discovered it. However, I don't think that's actually what matters, because we are not in competition with technology so much as we are in competition with other businesses. And every other business that we're in competition with has this exact same challenge too. So really what it comes down to is not so much, am I able to change my company at an exponential rate? It's, can I change my company faster, or the things I choose to change, am I smarter and more strategic about it, you know, that I can do a better job than my competitors can? And this is where I think you see, like, I mean, one of the things, you know, the companies that are really good at this do is they're very thoughtful about which changes they embrace. They don't try to embrace everything because it, you know, it gets scattered. It's trying to do too much. You know, they focus on a very small number of things that are most relevant to their business and their customers, and they focus on making sure that that's what they're changing and adapting best. The other thing that you see a lot of is, you know, I've always been a big fan of agile management methodologies, you know, that started in software, but they've kind of morphed and evolved into everything now that all businesses are kind of software. And companies that I think become good at agile management, this ability to change as a capability, you know, they also end up with a competitive advantage in that environment too.
Yeah, thank you very much. Super interesting. Maybe we'll go to another, maybe one or two more questions from our guests, from our audience. It's interesting question. You know, what is your view on, you know, we are talking about the replacing by AI, all this customer experience kind of tag and the customer experience process. What if AI gets deployed on the other side, on the side of consumer?
Oh, I actually expect that will happen. You know, and it's one of those second order effects, you know, that particularly as there's just more and more content and more services out there. It's just, I mean, an individual consumer still only has a certain amount of time and a certain amount of attention. And so I think we will start to see over this next year, even more and more agents that consumers and buyers use to say, hey, here's what I am looking for, or here's what I would like. Go out and find the best thing for me. Or even something that's always on, something that you're like, hey, agent, you know, this is who I am. And because it's your agent, you trust sharing more data and information with it, you know, and then the agent can sort of be in an always on way of like scouring things to be like, hey, listen, I saw this, or I thought you might want to read this article, you know. So what that's going to mean for us as marketers, I mean, it does get really interesting. You're like, at some level, we've got marketers on one end and consumers on the other. But if we each have our AIs that are acting on our behalf, I mean, I think that's going to happen. How we're actually going to manage that and deal with that, yeah, I don't know yet. It's we're going to have to discover that one together.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I think that Gartner has just published a first time this AI, generative AI hype cycle, and have you seen that already?
I haven't seen that, but doesn't surprise me.
I think that happened last week. This was the first kind of hype cycle on generative AI by Gartner, and I think that those agents are there somewhere. I can't remember where, but they're certainly like as kind of tech. Scott, super grateful for you being with us, and I wanted to thank you. Again, great presentation, great feedback, great energy. I think that's really important. Super nice. And thank you very much. And I hope we will stay in touch. And whenever you are in Krakow, in Poland, just let me know. I'll get you a beer.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Enjoy the rest of the session.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Speak soon, hopefully.